Afternoon all, Mark from Excel here again in a somewhat loud orange top. My apologies, it's been a sporty afternoon, but time enough to fit in a white wine tasting of a rather fine Spanish wine, and one that's come to our notice quite late in the day and has been quite a surprise in terms of how good it is. Not a surprise actually in terms of the ratings it's had. It's been rated very highly by Jancis Robinson's team in the last couple of months, 17.5 out of 20, which for her is a hugely high rating. And then in the very recent panel test of Spanish indigenous whites, it doesn't finish in the top 3 or 4, but on 93 points, it does extremely well. It's a really unusual white for so many reasons, and I'll try to explain them and try not to take too long. It's this one. It's from, as it says, it's from the Airen grape, and it's from La Mancha in the middle of Spain. So La Mancha, famous for Don Quixote, Cervantes, and for being really hot, really arid and dry. Also for producing something like 50% of all of Spain's wine, all wines, and something like 35% of the entire area under vine in all of Europe. I mean, some ridiculously high figure. But the vast majority of what comes out of La Mancha and is made out of Airen is, frankly, awful. Some of it is distilled into brandy, Spanish brandy, brandy to Jerez. A lot of it is turned into very cheap, very low grade table wines, which are sold mainly in Spain, but also make it across continental Europe. I mean, the sort of things that sell for a few euro centimes a bottle. And to say that they are ordinary, those bottles of wine, is frankly something of a compliment. However, you can do interesting things with Airen. And the producer of this, who are Ulterior, which is an arm of Bodegas Verim, based in La Mancha, have done something really very unusual with it. For starters, the grapes are on ungrafted rootstocks, which is to say that they are not vines which were put onto alternative rootstocks some years ago to protect them against phylloxera. These are original rootstocks, which is really unusual, hence the term Pied Franco relates to French roots or original roots. And the way in which they make it is really quite unusual. They only take the free run juice, so there's no pressing off and taking any of the pressed juice. And what is more, it is then fermented in what they call clay Tinadas, or these great old clay pots, very often used in Georgian wines as well for a lot of the fermentation, and then stored in steel afterwards. So it's a 2019, it's still quite a young wine, but it has a bearing of a wine of considerably greater years. It's a fascinating wine, it really is. And another key point, it has no oak. Now, those of you who watch my tastings of white wine know that I'm a bit of an oak fan. I like wine with texture. I like it with depth and with a complexity. I'm not typically into the lighter end of wines which are only made in steel. The Albariños, the Sauvignon Blancs of this world, I quite like them, but they're not really my thing. Normally, to get a bit more texture out of a wine, it often implies the use of oak. There's other ways you can do it, lees contact. Obviously, aging in itself brings a complexity, a number of ways you can do it. But I wouldn't on paper have expected to like this wine very much. But it is pretty fascinating. As you can see, I hope, really quite gold in the glass. Immediately tells you it's probably got some texture to it, it's probably got a bit of thickness to it. On the nose, unusual. You know there's quite a lot going on in there. Immediately you pick up something of, this isn't the most flattering way of putting it, a yeasty smell. There is something not dissimilar to some of the smells that you get on champagne, some of the lees-aged wines like Muscadet, lees-aged Albariño, but there is a complexity there which goes just beyond pure fruit. In terms of fruit, quite interesting. Jancis says she picks up some sort of lime marmalade going on in there. There's something citric in there. I'm not sure I'll make it lime, but also the citric element is not, for me, the strongest element of those fruit flavours. It's not green fruit, it's not apples or greengage or gooseberries or anything like that. It's a much riper fruit, and I think I'm picking up, I think they kind of say tinned peach. I'm not sure I would go as far as that, but it's definitely peach, apricot, stone fruit. There's a ripeness to this, a real richness in the flavours. I think they even talked of mango, maybe, but there is a definite richness in that. It speaks of ripe fruit right from the word go, but there is a complexity in there as well. And it's not just about fruit. There is something a bit secondary from the winemaking as well. On the palate, it's dry, but the richness and the ripeness of the fruit definitely overcome some of the dryness. It's It is complex. There's a whole series of layers going on in there. You definitely get that yeasty, it's too much to call it brioche, but there is something going on in there which speaks of the way that it's been sitting on the lees and has picked up some of that lees contact. Again, in fruit, that reflected ripe fruit flavours in there, but it's got a huge finish on it. And the most noticeable thing about it is the texture. It has the texture not dissimilar to a wine that has been in certainly old oak, maybe new oak. There's a viscosity to it. It clings to the side of the mouth in a really attractive way. And honestly, that finish just goes on and on and on. There's a real length to this wine. Tried it with a couple of different foodstuffs now. Goes with just about anything that white wines typically do. But it definitely sits again, and we've talked about this with a couple of those recent Spanish indigenous whites when we talked about the White Rioja, and we also talked about the Godella from Raul Perez, that they're fascinating in that they've got acidity and they've got bite and they've got interest, a sort of refreshment value to them, but they've got texture and depth to them as well. And this is really fascinating. I mean, I think, as we said, Airen, La Mancha, not renowned, not meant to be good wines, but what Verim, Ulterior, the part of Verim that make this, have done with it has made it truly fascinating. I'm going with this as one of the best white wines I've tasted this year. I think Jancis's phrase was, "Gosh, this is good," which I think is probably quite a polite way of putting how I feel about it. It is absolutely excellent. You've got to like dryness in your wine. There is dryness, there is acidity there, but it is absolutely superb. And really, for the wine adventurer wanting to go a little bit off-piste, this is superb. Give it a go.